This girl reveals the location of a missing millionaire's son, and when everyone discovers where he is, they are shocked. Rate my story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The Tuesday morning sun warmed the cobblestones of the town square in Willow Creek when Lily extended her small, dirty hand to yet another hurried passerby. Her 4 years of age seemed to carry the weight of decades, and her bare feet already knew every irregularity of the cold pavement she walked every day. The girl had woken up that morning in the same spot as always, under the awning of the old Woolworths, wrapped only in a thin blanket she'd found days ago. "Spare change," she whispered, her voice hoarse from spending the night in the open. The man in the suit passed by without even looking, like so many others did daily. Lily wasn't surprised. She was used to the indifference, but something in her large, expressive brown eyes suggested that she saw much more than a child her age should see. Across town, in the upscale neighborhood of Oakwood, Richard Sterling adjusted his tie in front of the mirror in his luxurious office. At 52, the real estate developer had built a modest but solid empire in Willow Creek, erecting small residential and commercial buildings that dotted the city's landscape. His calloused hands told the story of someone who had started from scratch, hauling bricks before learning to command entire teams. But behind the financial success, Richard carried a wound that hadn't healed for 8 long years. Tommy, his son, had mysteriously disappeared at the age of 6 on an ordinary Thursday afternoon after leaving Maple Elementary School. The boy had simply vanished into thin air, leaving only footprints in the damp earth of the schoolyard and a blue teddy bear forgotten on the bench where he usually waited for his father. Guilt had corroded Richard's marriage like acid. Valerie, his 48-year-old wife and former music teacher, blamed him for the carelessness of that day. He had been delayed at work, a common problem when developing a commercial building downtown, and had arrived at the school 40 minutes later than planned. When he finally arrived, Tommy was no longer there, and no one had seen where the boy had gone. "You promised you'd be there at 5, Valerie had screamed that terrible night, her tears mixing with the rain that had begun to fall. "You promised, Richard. And now our son—" The sentence remained incomplete, but its weight had crushed any remaining harmony between them. Valerie had retired early from her position as a public school teacher, unable to enter a classroom without seeing Tommy's face among the empty desks. Alcohol had become her refuge, and psychiatric treatments a monthly routine that consumed both her energy and Richard's hope. During these 8 years, the businessman had spent an astronomical fortune hiring private investigators from Chicago, Los Angeles, and even New York. He had offered rewards that reached $500,000, scoured every corner of the surrounding counties, distributed posters in dozens of neighboring towns. Nothing. Tommy had simply disappeared, as if he had never existed. It was a morning like any other when fate decided to shuffle the cards again. Richard had left the office earlier than usual, feeling the familiar weight of melancholy that always visited him on Tuesdays, the same day of the week that Tommy had disappeared. He decided to walk to the town square, something he rarely did, in an attempt to break the routine that had become his emotional prison. That's when he saw Lily for the first time. The girl was sitting on the steps of the First Presbyterian Church, drawing something in the dirt with a small twig. Her brown hair was tangled and dirty, and her clothes, an oversized t-shirt and a torn skirt, suggested that it had been a long time since she had seen the inside of a house. But it was her eyes that caught Richard's attention. There was something in them that made him stop in the middle of the sidewalk, as if an invisible hand had grabbed his arm. "Mister," said Lily, looking up at him, "did you lose something?" The question was strange, and Richard frowned. Lose something? How could an abandoned child know that he had lost something, or someone? "Yes, you did," she insisted, dropping the twig and approaching him. "A boy who liked to collect soda bottle caps." Richard's world stopped. The sound of traffic in the square disappeared. The voices of other pedestrians turned into distant murmurs. Soda bottle caps. Tommy had developed an obsession with collecting them when he was 5 years old, keeping them in a shoebox under his bed. It was a detail that had never been released in the wanted posters, never been mentioned in interviews with the local press. "How do you know that?" asked Richard, crouching down to be at the girl's height. His voice came out rougher than he intended, laden with a mixture of hope and terror. Lily tilted her head to the side, like a little bird studying a curious object. He was also afraid of clowns. He cried when he saw one on television. Again, absolute accuracy. Tommy had developed this specific phobia after watching a horror movie that he had managed to see secretly one afternoon when Valerie had dozed off on the sofa. The boy had spent weeks having nightmares, and they never allowed clowns to appear on the television programming at home again. "Who are you?" murmured Richard, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. "How can you know these things?" But Lily just smiled, a sad and knowing smile that was too much for a child, and walked away, heading towards the fountain in the square. Richard tried to follow her, but a bus stopped right in front of him, and when the vehicle left, the girl had disappeared as if she were a mirage. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He replayed the conversation hundreds of times in his mind, questioning every word, every gesture. Could he have imagined it all? Could it just be his desperate mind, creating connections where they didn't exist? But the information was too specific, too precise. He decided to return to the square the next day. The next morning, Richard arrived at the town square even before the first merchants opened their stores. The sun was still struggling to break through the heavy clouds typical of winter in the Midwest, and the biting cold made his breath form small clouds of vapor. He had spent the entire night going through old photographs of Tommy, confirming every detail that the strange girl had mentioned. Everything was correct, frighteningly correct. Lily appeared around 8 in the morning, emerging from a side alley as if she were part of the shadows of the city. She wore the same clothes as the day before, but this time she was carrying a rag doll with one arm missing, hugging it to her chest as if it were her greatest treasure. When she saw Richard sitting on the same bench where Tommy used to wait for him, her eyes lit up with a recognition that seemed to go beyond a simple day apart. "You came back," she said, approaching without fear. "I knew you would." You knew my son?" asked Richard directly without beating around the bush. "You knew Tommy?" Lily sat next to him on the bench, swinging her legs that didn't reach the ground. Tommy always carried a blue teddy bear. Neptune, he called him. He said Neptune protected him from the monsters under the bed. Richard's blood ran cold. Neptune, the blue teddy bear that Tommy had received on his 4th birthday, named after the god of the seas because, according to the boy, he was strong like the ocean. This information had never been shared with investigators, never mentioned in reports. It was an intimate family secret. "Where did you meet him?" insisted Richard, feeling his throat tighten. "When?" Lily turned her face to him, and for the first time Richard could see up close the disturbing depth of those brown eyes. There was an ancientness in them that didn't match her 4 years, as if she had witnessed things that no child should see. "At the old school," she murmured. "He stayed down there where it's dark, always hungry, always crying softly so no one would hear." "What old school?" asked Richard, but even before she answered, he already knew the answer. "The school where the birds don't sing anymore," said Lily, pointing vaguely in the southern direction of the city. "The school that has been sleeping for a long time. Maple Elementary School. The same school from which Tommy had disappeared, closed 20 years ago due to structural problems shortly after the boy's disappearance." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. How could this girl, who appeared to be only 4 years old, know about Tommy being down at the school? And why did she speak in the past tense, as if, "You said he stayed there. Is he still there?" asked Richard, holding Lily's small shoulders. The girl shook her head slowly, and a solitary tear ran down her dirty cheek. Tommy left when the water came. The water took everything. Before Richard could ask more questions, Lily got up abruptly and began to walk away. I need to go. He doesn't like it when I talk too much. Who doesn't like it? Shouted Richard, but she was already running in the direction of Main Street, disappearing among the morning pedestrians. Richard remained on the bench for more than an hour, processing what he had just heard. Water. The girl had mentioned water. 3 years ago, Willow Creek had suffered one of the worst floods in its history. The Willow River had overflowed violently after a week of torrential rains, flooding several neighborhoods and causing structural damage to old buildings throughout the city. That afternoon, he did something he hadn't done in years. He cancelled all work meetings and drove to the house where he lived with Valerie. The mansion in the Oakwood neighborhood had become a silent mausoleum where the two wandered like ghosts, avoiding any conversation that could touch the open wound that was Tommy's absence. He found Valerie in the music room, sitting in front of the grand piano that hadn't been played since the son's disappearance. She was holding a glass of red wine, even though it was only 2 in the afternoon, and her eyes were red and swollen, signs of another night of insomnia fueled by alcohol and tranquilizers. "Valerie, I need to tell you something," said Richard, sitting cautiously on the sofa in front of her. "If it's about another investigator, I don't want to hear it," she replied, without lifting her eyes from the glass. "We've already spent enough money feeding false hopes. It's not about an investigator. It's about a girl who knows things about Tommy, things that only we knew." Valerie finally looked up, and Richard saw a glimpse of something he hadn't seen in a long time, genuine interest mixed with fear. "What kind of things?" Richard told her about the 2 encounters with Lily, detailing every impossible piece of information she had shared. As he spoke, he saw Valerie's face go through a range of emotions: disbelief, hope, terror, and finally, a familiar anger. "You're delirious," she said, getting up abruptly and walking to the window. 8 years, Richard. 8 years of searching, and now you're telling me that a street girl knows where our son was. "I know how it sounds, but—" "It sounds like despair," interrupted Valerie, turning to face him. "It sounds like a man who is so consumed by guilt that he has started to see signs where they don't exist." But even as she spoke, Richard noticed something different in his wife's eyes, a spark of curiosity that she was trying to stifle, but that still shone behind the mask of skepticism. "She mentioned the school," continued Richard, "Maple Elementary School, and she said that Tommy was down there, in a dark place." Valerie froze. Maple Elementary School had been the center of their initial investigations, the last place where Tommy had been seen. They had searched every corner of the abandoned building during the first months after the disappearance, but never found any evidence of the boy's presence. "The school doesn't have a basement," murmured Valerie. "That's what I thought too," said Richard, "but this girl speaks as if she knew every detail of the place. And there's one more thing." He paused, gathering courage to share the most disturbing part of the conversation. "She said that Tommy left when the water came. The flood of 3 years ago, Valerie. She was talking about the flood." The silence that followed was dense and suffocating. Valerie sat down again, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the glass on the coffee table. "Where does this girl live?" she asked finally. "I don't know. She appears in the square, says these impossible things, and then disappears. But I'm going to find her again tomorrow." "I'm going with you," said Valerie, and there was a determination in her voice that Richard hadn't heard in years. That night, for the first time in a long time, the two slept in the same bed, not out of reconciliation, but united by a desperate need for answers. Valerie had stopped drinking after the conversation, and Richard realized that she was more alert and present than she had been in months. But what neither of them knew was that, on the other side of town, In an abandoned house near the old Maple Elementary School, Lily wasn't sleeping. She was sitting on the cold floor of a windowless room, talking in whispers to someone that no one else could see. "He came back, Tommy," she murmured to the shadows. "The daddy you always waited for came back, but I can't tell everything yet. You know he gets mad when I tell." In the darkness of the abandoned room, only the echo of her own voice answered her. But for Lily, it was as if she had company. It was as if Tommy was still there, whispering back, asking her to be strong a little longer. On Thursday morning, Richard and Valerie arrived at the town square together for the first time in 8 years. The air between them still carried the weight of unresolved grievances, but an urgent need for answers had temporarily suspended hostilities. Valerie wore her best business attire, as if for an important business meeting, while Richard couldn't stop checking his watch every few minutes. Lily appeared promptly at 8 o'clock, but this time she wasn't alone. An elderly woman accompanied her, a lady of approximately 70 years old, grey hair tied in a loose bun, simple but clean clothes. When she saw Richard, the woman whispered something in Lily's ear and quickly walked away, disappearing among the stalls of the morning market. "Who was that woman?" asked Valerie as soon as Lily approached. "Mrs. Higgins," replied the girl, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She gives me food sometimes. Says I remind her of someone she lost too." Richard and Valerie exchanged glances. "Too." The word echoed between them like an alarm bell. "Lily," said Valerie, crouching down to be at the girl's height, "can you take us to the old school? The school where you said that Tommy stayed?" Lily's eyes widened with something akin to terror. "I can't. He won't let me, especially not during the day." "Who won't let you?" insisted Richard. But Lily just shook her head vigorously, hugging her armless doll tighter. "You don't understand. He takes care of me now, but only because I don't tell the secrets. If you tell what?" asked Valerie, feeling her heart race. "If I tell where Tommy's other things are, he'll be very angry with me." The world seemed to spin around Richard. Other things. Tommy's personal belongings still existed, somewhere, preserved for 8 long years. "What other things?" he managed to ask, his voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. Lily looked around nervously, as if fearing that someone might be watching. "The bottle caps he collected, Neptune, and the family photo he always looked at before going to sleep." Valerie felt her legs weaken. The family photo. Tommy had taken a small, wallet-sized photo of the 3 of them to school on the day of the disappearance, hidden in his shirt pocket. They had mentioned this to the investigators, but it was never found. "Can you show us these things?" asked Valerie, trying to keep her voice calm. Lily hesitated for a long moment, biting her lower lip. "Only if you promise not to tell anyone, and only if it's in the afternoon, when he leaves." "When who leaves?" insisted Richard. "The man who takes care of me," said Lily. "He leaves every afternoon at 3 o'clock. Stays out until dark. That's when I can visit the forbidden places." Richard felt a chill down his spine. A man. There was a man involved in this, someone who exerted control over Lily, someone who forbade her from talking about certain things. "Where do we meet you at 3 in the afternoon?" asked Valerie. "At Joe's Bakery on the street that goes to the old school," replied Lily. "But come alone." "If he sees strange people with me—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the fear in her eyes completed the thought in a terrifying way. After the girl walked away again, Richard and Valerie remained silent for several minutes, processing what they had just discovered. "There's someone controlling her," said Valerie finally. "Someone who's using her, who knows about Tommy and is manipulating this child." "But how does she know such specific details?" questioned Richard. "Details that even the investigators didn't know?" "I don't know," admitted Valerie, "but we're going to find out this afternoon." The next few hours dragged on like an eternity. Richard once again cancelled his work appointments, while Valerie, for the first time in years, didn't touch a drop of alcohol. Both were consumed by a mixture of hope and terror, the possibility of answers finally within reach, but accompanied by a dark premonition about what those answers might reveal. At 2:30 in the afternoon, they were positioned near Joe's Bakery, a small family-owned confectionery on Elm Street which led directly to the neighborhood where the old Maple Elementary School was located. The establishment was located in a poorer area of the city, where the houses were simple and the vacant lots abundant. Lily appeared promptly at 3 o'clock, as promised. This time her clothes were different, a light blue dress that, although used, was clean and without tears. Her hair had been combed and tied with a simple elastic band. "He left," she said simply. "We can go now, but we can't take too long." Lily led them through streets that Richard knew vaguely, but along paths that seemed to follow a logic of her own. She avoided the main streets, preferring alleys and shortcuts that demonstrated an intimate knowledge of that area of the city. During the walk she spoke little, only murmured occasionally to her doll, as if she were talking to a friend. After 15 minutes of walking, they arrived at a vacant lot covered in tall grass, located approximately 200 yards from Maple Elementary School. In the center of the land, almost invisible among the vegetation, there was a small masonry construction, probably an old warehouse or caretaker's house. "It's here," said Lily, stopping in front of the dilapidated building. "Do you live here?" asked Valerie, horrified by the conditions of the place. "Sometimes," replied Lily, "when he lets me. Other times I sleep in the old school, in the place where Tommy stayed." She led them inside the small building. The space was minimal, just one room with about 30 square feet, without windows, illuminated only by the light that came through the door. In the farthest corner, there was a small hole in the wall covered by a loose stone. Lily carefully removed the stone and took from the hiding place a tied plastic bag. Inside the bag, preserved like sacred relics, were the objects she had mentioned. Dozens of soda bottle caps of different brands and colors, organized in small piles, a faded blue teddy bear, but still recognizable as Neptune, and a small wallet-sized photograph, damaged by moisture, but still clearly showing the smiling faces of Richard, Valerie, and Tommy. Valerie burst into tears upon seeing the objects. They were tangible pieces of her son, preserved for all these years, as if they were priceless treasures. Richard picked up the teddy bear with trembling hands, still feeling the familiar scent that accompanied him to Tommy's memories. "How did you get these things?" asked Richard, struggling to maintain his composure. "Tommy gave them to me," replied Lily, "before the water came. He said that if someday someone came looking for him, I should show these things. Said that way you would know that he was telling the truth through me." "Telling the truth through you?" repeated Valerie, confused. Lily nodded gravely. "Tommy still talks to me. Not always, but sometimes. Especially when I come here, or when I go to the old school. He wants you to know that he didn't suffer much. He wants you to know that he understands why Daddy was late that day." The words hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. The forgiveness that he had sought desperately for 8 years, coming from the voice of a 4-year-old child who claimed to talk to his deceased son. "But there's one thing that Tommy can't tell me," continued Lily, her voice getting smaller. "He can't tell me where the man who took him is, the man who took both of us." Valerie and Richard looked at each other, a freezing terror taking over both of them. "Lily," said Richard carefully, "are you saying that you were also taken?" "By the same man who took Tommy?" Lily nodded, her large eyes filling with tears. "But I was very small. I don't remember it well. I just remember the dark, and Tommy's voice calming me down when I cried. And I remember the water, lots of water, and Tommy shouting my name when the current separated us." "And the man who takes care of you now?" asked Valerie, her heart beating uncontrollably. "It's the same one," whispered Lily. "It's always the same one." The silence that followed Lily's revelation was broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. Richard and Valerie looked at the girl as if she were an impossible puzzle to solve, each piece revealing a more disturbing reality than the previous one. "Lily," said Valerie in a trembling voice, "I need you to tell us everything. From the beginning. Where did you meet Tommy? How did you end up together?" The girl hugged her armless doll and began to rock back and forth, a rhythmic movement that seemed to calm her down. I was very, very small. I don't remember how I got to the dark place. I just remember being very scared. And then Tommy appeared. He was bigger than me, braver. He said his daddy was coming to get us. What dark place was that? Asked Richard, feeling his stomach churn. Under the old school. There was a place that the man made, with brick walls and a heavy door. Tommy said that there used to be other kids there, but when I arrived, there were only 2 of us. Valerie covered her mouth with her hands, trying to contain a sob. The image of her little son, taking care of an even smaller child in a desperate situation, was too devastating to process completely. The man, continued Lily, he wasn't bad all the time. He brought food, blankets. He said he was protecting us from the bad world out there, but sometimes he got very angry, especially when Tommy asked about going home. How did you manage to get out of there? Asked Richard. Lily's eyes filled with tears. The water came. It rained a lot, for many days. The water started to enter the dark place. The man tried to get us out, but the door got stuck. The water was rising very fast. She paused, lost in the traumatic memories. Tommy picked me up and told me not to be afraid. When the water reached the ceiling, we managed to get out through a hole that the water made in the wall. But outside there was a very strong current. And then, whispered Valerie, Tommy pushed me to a tree that had fallen into the water. He shouted for me to hold on tight and not let go. But he was carried away by the water. He shouted my name, told me to be strong, for me to find his daddy one day. Richard felt his legs weaken. His son had sacrificed his own life to save another child. Even in a desperate situation, Tommy had been brave until the end. And the man? Asked Valerie. What happened to him? He found me later. I was in an abandoned house, all wet and hungry. He said that now I was his responsibility, that no one else was going to take care of me. He said that if I told anyone about the dark place, bad things would happen. Where is he now? Asked Richard, a controlled rage growing in his chest. Works in a hardware store downtown. Always comes back when it gets dark. He's not like before anymore. After he lost Tommy in the flood, he got very sad too. Sometimes he cries when he thinks I'm not seeing. Suddenly the sound of heavy footsteps approaching made Lily freeze in terror. He came back early, she whispered, quickly putting Tommy's objects back in the hiding place. You need to leave now. We're not leaving you here, said Valerie firmly. You have to leave, insisted Lily. If he sees you here with me, he'll do something bad. He'll leave the city and take me with him. Then you'll never know the whole truth. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. Richard grabbed Valerie by the arm, but she resisted. Lily, you don't have to stay with him, said Valerie quickly. We can take you to a safe place. We can... Later, Lily interrupted. Tomorrow, in the square, I'll tell you the rest. There's more that you need to know. About why he chose Tommy. About the other children who came before. The mention of other children made Richard's blood run cold. But there was no time for more questions. The footsteps were almost at the door. Richard and Valerie quickly left through the back of the building, hiding behind a large tree about 50 yards away. From where they were, they could see the entrance to the small house. A man appeared at the door. It was George Mitchell, 67 years old, former caretaker of Maple Elementary School. Richard recognized him immediately. During the initial investigations, George had been one of the people questioned, but had been dismissed as a suspect for appearing to be a simple and religious man, respected in the community. "Lily," called George in a gentle voice, "where were you? I told you to stay here when I left." "I was just playing in the yard, Mr. Mitchell," replied the girl, coming out of the building with rehearsed naturalness. "How many times do I have to tell you that it's dangerous to go out alone? There are bad people out there, people who can hurt you like they hurt the other children." Richard and Valerie exchanged glances. George talked about protecting Lily from bad people, but he himself had kidnapped and held children captive. "Sorry, Mr. Mitchell," said Lily. "It won't happen again." "I hope not. Now come on, I brought sweetbread for you." The two entered the building, and Richard pulled Valerie further away, out of earshot. "It's him," whispered Richard. "George Mitchell. He worked at the school for 20 years before retiring. He had access to all the facilities, knew every corner of the building." "We need to call the police," said Valerie. "With what evidence?" questioned Richard. "The testimony of a traumatized child who claims to talk to our deceased son. They'll think we've gone completely insane. So what do? We go back tomorrow, we hear the rest of Lily's story, and then we find a way to prove all this." That night, Richard and Valerie again slept in the same bed. But this time, neither of them could close their eyes. The day's revelations had been too devastating to process quickly. Tommy had been alive for years after his disappearance, held captive by a man they knew and trusted. And in the end, their brave boy had given his own life to save another child. "He was so small," murmured Valerie in the darkness. "How could he be so brave?" "Because he was our son," replied Richard, his voice choked with emotion. "Because we taught him to care for others, even when he was just a child." The next morning, they arrived at the square before sunrise. Lily appeared at 8 o'clock, as always, but this time she brought something different, a yellowed envelope and a small wooden box. "I brought what was left," she said simply. "Tommy asked me to keep everything for when you came." In the envelope was a letter written in irregular childlike handwriting. "Mom and Dad, if anyone is reading this, I'm already gone. It wasn't Daddy's fault for being late at school. The man had been waiting for me for days. He said he was going to take care of me, but he only let me stay in a dark place. I met Lily here. She's very brave too. If anything happens to me, take care of her. She doesn't have anyone else. I love you. Tommy." In the wooden box were more soda bottle caps and a small drawing that Tommy had made of her and Lily holding hands, with the sun shining above them. "Now you know everything," said Lily. "Tommy can rest in peace, and I can stop pretending he still talks to me." Richard and Valerie looked at the girl with new understanding. During all this time, Lily had carried the weight of the truth alone, protecting Tommy's memory and awaiting the day when she could finally share her story. "You're coming with us now," said Valerie, extending her hand to Lily. "You'll be our daughter if you want." Lily looked at the outstretched hand and then at the hopeful faces of Richard and Valerie. For the first time in years, a genuine smile lit up her small face. "Tommy always said that you would take care of me," she said, taking Valerie's hand. "Said that when the time came, I would have a real family again." 6 months later, George Mitchell was confronted with the evidence found in the underground facilities of the old school and confessed everything to the authorities. His mental disorder made him believe that he was saving abandoned children, but the isolation and control he exerted over them constituted serious crimes. He was admitted to a psychiatric institution for treatment. Lily, now officially adopted by Richard and Valerie, began attending therapy and a regular school. Little by little, the imaginary conversations with Tommy were being replaced by real games with other children. And although the longing for Tommy remained forever in their hearts, the family had found a way to honor his memory by taking care of the brave girl he had protected with his own life. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. And thank you very much.